Welcome to another State of the Developmental Assets webinar. We're very excited for you to be here today. We're excited to get started. I know as people are beginning to join right on the hour, I just wanted to welcome you. This is always a highlight for us is to hold these webinars and interact with you all, even in these larger settings. And the chat is a wonderful place to have dialogue. If you have questions for anybody on the panel or in the conversation today, please put that in the question and answering section. But thank you for being here. I know time is a precious commodity, and for you to take the time to be here today means a lot. I am Ben Holtberg. I am the CEO and president of Search Institute. And I have with me today my wonderful colleague and just a great partner in this work, Dr. Joanna Williams, who is our Senior Director of Research. We're excited to share with you some of the insights from our research, from some of the data points that we're getting, and also to highlight some of our incredible partners that you'll hear more about that have been long-standing partners of Search Institute over the last several years. Just to say it out loud, because I know many will ask, we will be sending this recording to you, to all the people who have registered, as well as the slides shortly after this time. For some of you, you may already know Search Institute, and we are grateful for the partnerships we have. For others, maybe you are just getting familiar with us. It's really critical that for us to be able to describe ourselves as really working in this intersection of rigorous research and science, but that it also has to include the wisdom that you bring, that you already hold on the ground every day, and the lived experience. And at the intersection of all of those is where we want to live and breathe and be a part of supporting. And then together, as we do this work that's rooted in research, and you all are doing the work on the ground every day, we can create actionable change, meaningful change right now at a time where it's so critical. And also that really, as you move, if we can only accomplish our mission when we're helping you move towards your mission. And we're grateful for our partners in doing this work. And then finally, really the focus on strengthening relationships and environments. This is a critical part about what we mean when we talk about you thriving. Thriving is thrown around in many ways today. I think it's important that we describe what we're talking about when we define thriving. This came from a paper that came all the way back from 2009, but continues to be true and resonate today. And that is that thriving is dynamic and it's bi-directional and it's ongoing. And when we think about a thriving young person, we're thinking about how they are adding value to their environment, and the environment is providing affordances, opportunities, and access so that their lights, their sparks, their strengths, their internal, all the things that are already within them are allowed to shine and come out in the world. And when they do, and they have that access to people and places and opportunity, they make our communities better, and that we need each other in a mutual beneficial way. And that it is inherently relational when we're talking about thriving, that thriving requires the types of quality of relationships to be the vehicle and the catalyst for change. And so as we think about thriving today, in this moment, at this time, when we're facing tremendous challenges across the board, and we think about the resilience and some of the narratives about this generation of young people from different reports that have come out, our media headlines, and we think about some of the ways that this generation of young people are being described, we have to hold this truth that all young people, each and every, have inherent value and something to offer the world today. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves and those around us that there is a story here, not just of resilience. Resilience is important because right now we know that we want our young people to be resilient, but also towards a vision of thriving. And that's what thriving provides us is what are we drawn, what are young people drawn towards? What is the telos? What is the end goal? And so my question to you is there's two things I would like to see kind of take off in the chat today as we start going through the data. One is now that more people have joined us, please put your where you're joining from, city, state. That might already be happening. I'm not paying attention. That's a joy to see that. Where are you tuning in from and what type of organization? And then also we would love for an ideas to start to emerge from you all on how are you helping young people build those resilient skills and holding on and helping them maintain that hope towards the future. So with that, we're going to give a few moments for that to begin to populate in the chat. And then I'm going to pass it over to Joanna to take us through some of the data that we're seeing as I get to kind of enjoy and see people tuning in from everywhere from Pennsylvania to Oklahoma to Texas, Delaware. I mean, it's just coming in, and this is wonderful to see the people tuning in from all over the world. So, Joanna, I'm gonna let you do your thing now and break down kind of some of the themes we're seeing in our data.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ben. It's really always a joy and privilege to hear you uplift our young people and our partners. And I appreciate that grounding. Welcome everybody who had time and made time to join us today. I'm excited to talk more about developmental assets. I'm going to spend a little bit of time giving you some snapshots into the data that we have. And then we're going to welcome a couple of expert partners who are going to really kind of breathe life into the assets work that they're doing on a daily basis. So let me start, for those who are new, by giving you an overview. Developmental assets are the external supports and internal strengths that young people have and need to support positive development. Our developmental assets framework is organized into 20 external and 20 internal assets, which are grouped across the 8 categories that you see on the slides. The 20 external assets reflect key experiences and opportunities that we provide through families, schools, youth programs, and broader communities. And they include support, empowerment, boundaries and expectations, and constructive use of time. The 20 internal assets capture our young people's personal skills, values, and self-perceptions that help them make positive choices, assume responsibility, and thrive. And these include commitment to learning, positive values, social competencies, and positive identity. We know that assets can be cultivated intentionally in our day-to-day interactions across settings. And we also know that we can measure them to gain an understanding of use experiences and needs. So I'm going to say a little bit more about that cultivation day to day, and then I'm going to talk about the data. As Ben mentioned, we think about thriving as really this dynamic interaction between people and settings. And we know that thriving is more likely when young people's strengths and capacities are matched with the strengths and capacities of the people and places around them. So that means that a critical factor that can help align internal and external assets really are the relationships that youth experience every day. In particular, developmental relationships, which we define as the close connections through which young people discover who they are, cultivate their abilities to shape their own lives, and learn how to engage with and contribute to the world around them, are an essential ingredient for activating the assets that support thriving. So developmental relationships really do a great job of connecting internal and external. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the data. First, let me tell you where the data come from. The data that I'll be talking about today are based on results from surveys of young people using the Developmental Assets Profile, or the DAP. These data were collected between last July and this past June from nearly 29,000 young people. Our DAP surveys were done in 228 organizations representing 26 states and the District of Columbia. So not nationally representative technically, but really giving us a good snapshot of young people across the nation. About a third of the organizations were schools and 2/3 were community-based organizations. You can see a little bit more about gender and racial ethnic breakdowns in the sample. And the data that I'll be reporting on highlight the experiences of students who are in grades 4 through 12. I'm going to start by the high level of external and internal asset scores overall, but let me tell you a little bit more about scoring. When young people complete the DAP, the Developmental Assets Profile, they report on how much they're experiencing each asset on a scale from 0, which is not at all or rarely, up to 3, which is extremely or almost always. And we multiply those scores by 10 to make interpretation just a little bit easier. So scores for overall internal and external assets can range from 0 to 30, with higher scores meaning youth are experiencing assets at a higher or more frequent level. So now let's look at some of these bar graphs. On the right, we've got our most recent data, and then the other two sets of graphs are from 2021-22 and 2022-23. The lighter aqua-colored bars are the external assets, and you can see this year, external asset scores are at 21 out of 30, which is higher compared to earlier years. Similarly, the darker blue bar are internal asset scores. This year, the average was 20 out of 30, so there's been an upward trend there as well. And the overall story of our data this year is that as I break it down for you, you'll see some positive trends in terms of increasing. Now I want to look at the four domains of external and internal assets. In these two charts, this year's data are on the right and data from 2 years ago are on the left. And as I mentioned, we're seeing higher asset scores in every asset domain this year compared to 2 years ago. On the top four bars, we have the external asset categories: support, empowerment, boundaries and expectations, and constructive use of time. Youth are experiencing these external assets more frequently than in past years. The categories below this red line, if you can see that, are internal assets: commitment to learning, positive values, social competencies, and positive identity. And what we see is that overall scores for positive values and social competencies, which are the bars in the middle of the four external asset categories, actually moved from average scores being in the vulnerable range, that yellow color, to adequate. This means that more youth on average were experiencing assets in these categories often or almost always, compared to sometimes or not at all. So we saw some significant change there as well. And now I want to kind of go one layer further into individual assets, starting with internal. When we take a closer look at internal assets, here are some of the highlights from what young people are saying in their surveys. As you can see from these percentages, the large majority are embodying positive values like helping and respecting others, avoiding substance use, and showing how much they value differences. And while overall scores on the last slide for the category of commitment to learning were lower compared to other internal asset categories, when we look at things like what youth tell us about doing well in school, you can see that the majority, in this case 82%, really want to do well both in school and out of school. So they have these commitments that are important to them. When we look at some of the individual external asset items in the DAP survey, we can see that young people report consistently having supportive people and places in their relational ecosystem. And this includes their friends, their parents, their teachers, their other adults, as well as schools. So 77% are saying that they have a school that encourages and cares about them. So it is, again, these external resources and settings that matter a lot. And I want to turn briefly actually to talk a little bit more about developmental contexts. So in addition to examining external and internal assets, we can also look at the data by focusing on use experiences of assets across domains. When we look at domains like personal, social, family, school, and community, much like in the other categories, there's an increase in what youth are experiencing in these asset building contexts. Family, which is the middle bar on both the left and the right graphs, continues to be the place where youth are experiencing support and connection most often. Schools and social relationships, which are here sort of in the middle two bars above and below family, come next. And you can see that on average, youth are experiencing these assets anywhere from often to almost always in this most recent wave of data, which is an increase compared to 2 years ago. And last, while many youth aren't experiencing personal and community assets with the same frequency as they are in other contexts, there's still an increasing trend this year compared to what youth were saying 2 years ago. The last pattern I want to highlight is one that we commonly see the data, and that's that younger youth tend to report higher levels and experiences of both external and internal assets compared to older youth. The decrease in asset experiences is a little bit steeper for external assets, which is the dark blue bar, compared to internal assets, which is the aqua colored or line, I should say. And we know that some of this maps onto the ways in which young people's settings, their relationships, and their developmental needs change over time. Our expert partners, who will join us momentarily, work with young people across these age and grade levels. So you'll have an opportunity to hear more about how these trends that we see in the national data align with their work and what it means for tuning assets so they align well with young people's developmental strengths and needs. So that is my brief big picture snapshot of our national data. Now I'm really excited to welcome in our two expert guests who are going to add depth and nuance to our conversation about assets. So I'll have them come off camera while I do some brief introductions. We are joined today by Zem Nguyen Neubert, who is the Executive Director of Project Cornerstone, which is an initiative of the YMCA of Silicon Valley. Project Cornerstone has been a Search Institute partner for over 25 years. Zim began volunteering with Project Cornerstone in 2011. She became the Director of School Partnerships in 2015 and has served as Executive Director since 2019. Their programs are structured around the 40 developmental assets. They serve over 175 schools, reach about 65,000 elementary and middle school students, and engage nearly 4,000 volunteers. Our second guest is Sarah Weisbarth, who is the director of Discover You, which is an initiative of the Rock Center for Youth Development in Michigan. Discover You has been partnering with Search Institute for over 20 years. Regionally, they reach over 2,000 students a year in that part of the country. They also train other adults in developmental assets. And so they have a much wider reach. When you think about those trained to deliver their curriculum and those they conduct professional development for each year, they indirectly reach over 100,000 students with Discover You programs. So please join me in welcoming Zim and Sarah to the stage. Thank you so much for being here. I have stopped sharing my slides so that we can see and hear from you, and I'm going to start with our first question. So, as I just shared just a couple of minutes ago, we often see in our assets data that our younger students are reporting higher levels of assets, and the levels tend to decline a bit among our older students. There's a little bit more of a decline for external assets than for internal assets. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective about the kinds of differences you might notice in the young people that you serve and partner with by age or grade or period of development, and how you think about attuning assets to meet their developmental needs. And Sarah, why don't we start with you?
Great. Thanks, Joanna. And just thank you for having us here. It was really interesting to look at your data and how that merge is happening in those later years of high school between those external and those internal assets, and how the work that we're doing not only in our out of school time programming with the Rock Center for Youth Development, but also our in-classroom work with Discover You aligns with that mission of really building that resiliency and that hope. And so if I think about the question of like that decline around that middle school, high school time period, it's kind of not surprising. If we think about youth and engaging in other activities outside of really being invested in their families, their focus is going to shift away from that family influence that we saw as high on your data and is now shifting more towards the school environment, their peers. How are they really relating with others, thinking about their own self-identity, their sense of purpose? And so it really, we see that decline in those assets, but not necessarily from like it's a problem. It's more from a standpoint of how are we then shifting and building our programming in such a way that students do have a positive experience with their community. They do have a positive place to go after school. They have other adults investing in them. And how are we equipping other adults that are part of maybe a coaching team or their educators or their paraprofessionals to be intentionally building those assets with the young people that they're impacting. So we see it as an opportunity to really invest in the adults that are working with those young people to help them develop those internal assets.
I love that. I love that. Zim, how about you? How do you relate to sort of that developmental shift and see it showing up?
Yeah, and thank you again it's an honor to be here. And I'm glad that Sarah's talking about it from the programmatic perspective. And again, just like she said, it's not surprising, this data, right? So you think of a fourth and fifth grader is in such a different place than a middle school or high school student. And I'm thinking about puberty as they go through their stages, and puberty is both beautiful and chaotic for them and for us adults around them as well. They're exploring identity, they're testing boundaries, they're trying new things, and their brains aren't, they're still developing, right? That prefrontal cortex, the decision-making part, won't fully mature until their mid-20s or late 20s. And meanwhile, their emotional brain, like, woohoo, it's like on overdrive, right? That can be very, very difficult for all of us. But I think when you think of assets, so what do we do with that, right? We are not going to stop puberty. We're just going to ride along with it. And I think what we need to remember is what they really need is our steady support, our love, and our continued guidance. But here's the thing, what we think is what they need, what we think they need is may not match what they really need, right? And a simple example is just, hugging my teen in front of their friends. I think it's beautiful. I think it's the way I show love, but it's probably embarrassing for, many teens, including my kids. But it's their perception that matters. And I'm always reminded that I need to step out of the way and let go of my ego if I'm going to be doing this work, with other young people as well as children of my own. And I also need to remember with the assets in mind that as our kids evolve, we must evolve too, right?
Mm.
So our role needs to shift from that manager, the one who's in charge of play dates and telling them what to eat and when to eat. And we need to shift it to more of a coach or a facilitator, just to be there to support them. And what does be there to support them mean, especially when you're talking about assets, is listening, listening without judgment, giving them some space, and even letting them fail, which is personally for me, it's really, really hard because I want to protect my kids, right? I don't want them to fail, but I have to let them fail. And that's how they build resilience, right? When Ben was talking about resilience. And here's something beautiful. If you work on the external assets, you're going to then help with the internal assets. And the external ones are the ones that we adults can actually provide. We have more control over that. And those are the skills and experiences and relationships that we can build for kids. And I think over time, that's the real power of the work. What can we do? How do we show up so that we can create these opportunities, so that all the assets will come? And they're not a checklist, it's not like do this one day and now I'm done. They're all connected and they overlap. And the last thing I want to say is, as an educator or someone in nonprofit, and also as a parent, I think I always want to remember that kids are watching us. So one of the, all the assets are important. One of the ones that come up to me, for me a lot is, I think it's number 14 or something like that, adult role model. And they're always watching us, even the teens, even though they pretend that they don't care. But that's adult role model. At the end, if we want respect, kindness, caring, calm, we have to model it ourselves first, right? And our kids don't need us to be perfect. That's not possible. They just need us to show up with love, listen deeply, and just grow alongside with them. And we don't need to mold them into our vision. We just need to help them discover their own spark and build that resilience and thrive. And I think assets is where you can do that.
I really appreciate that. You really kind of focused in on the dynamic back and forth nature. It isn't about, what adults are doing to or for young people, but there's this back and forth, they're bringing things and we're bringing things to the table. And I think there we're really seeing the critical role that relationships play in this work. And I know that in each of your settings, you center relationships as one of the key activators of developmental assets. So Zim, you started talking about that a little bit. But I'd love for you to say more about how and why relationships are critical for cultivating assets, and maybe give us an example of what this looks like in some of the work that you do.
Okay, well, we at Project Cornerstone, we love quoting you guys at Search Institute when you say that to build developmental assets, we need to create thousands of moments when young people feel valued, respected, and known. We borrowed your mantra and we say it all over the place, and that's how we train people. And it really truly starts with relationships. Developmental assets are, this is again what we learned from you guys, developmental assets are the what that young people need, and the relationships are the how. Okay, how we can build that. And how we show up, I think, truly matters. And we all do better when we feel safe, right? And be ourselves as adults. And think about it, when you're with people that you trust, you respect, you feel listened to, aren't you more likely to participate and be vulnerable and be yourself, right? And so young people are no different. They need the same thing. That presence of trust and safety changes everything. And to give you an example, at YMCA Project Cornerstone, our preschool through middle school programs focus on this idea of training adults to really accentuate asset number 3, other adult relationships, where the data is if young people can have at least 3 caring adults other than their primary caretaker in their lives, and they're more likely to thrive, right? So we train adult volunteers or staff to bring our curriculum into the classroom, and then they train their cohort of volunteers, and everybody goes into the classroom once a month to deliver the lessons, and all the lessons are asset-based. So that's one way to build relationships while whether it's using literature or using slides or different talking points, building assets, but then having another person in the classroom besides their teacher is really one of the keys, because we want to build that web of support.
Yeah, absolutely. That web of support. It's like this web of relationships that helps to cultivate assets. And I think that's really important. Sarah, I know relationships are critical to the work that you do as well, and would love to hear a little bit more about what that looks like.
Well, and I think about it from the standpoint of building our community youth and reaching them in a positive way is everyone's responsibility. In my previous role, I worked exclusively with adults, and we would teach conflict management. We would teach empathy and good communication skills. And I would spend hours really trying to convince and actually like wrestle adults to the ground that these skills are important skills. And then I would drop into a classroom with Discover You and talk about those same things. And the youth were like, yeah, we really get this. And here's an example of how I use this with my relationship with my friend. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation. And so it was very interesting to me, that difference of, as an adult, we get really set in our minds. And to Zem's point of like, if we can train adults to have those same skills and internally build our own resilience and our conflict management, then we're going to model that with the young people that we're working with. And we're going to have the skills and the tools to have those conversations to help young people develop their own sense of self, develop their own sense of purpose and their values and their identity. And it's such a, not really tumultuous, but it's such an interesting time in middle school and high school where you're like testing things out, I'm exploring things. And so if you can have that positive adult role model, that influence, that safe space where you can come to as a young person and say, I don't know what I think about this. And then we can coach and guide, instead of looking at youth as a problem and saying, well, you really need to do is, or here's what I did when I was your age, because we know young people love to hear that. Instead, we can be those adults in their lives, just like kind of holding those bumpers and those boundaries for young people to explore what it is that they want in their lives. And those relationships are so key. And so we focus on equipping and inspiring adults who work with youth, because we figure if we can put in the hands of other adults that are working with young people, our knowledge, our experience, what we've been seeing with developmental assets, our curriculum, for them to have like a framework, or even just I don't know, something to hold on to say, when I go have a conversation with young person about values, I've got some discussion questions here to maybe navigate through, then we really feel like we're equipping many adults to work positively with youth. but also family engagement. I think that's one of the things that we're seeing in that middle school and high school years is how are we supporting the families to carry on that developmental asset story at home? And so how are we doing that programmatically with our programming and our organization? So it's like wraparound. Where we're working with youth directly, but then how are we supporting the families that are our youth families?
I think that really ties in nicely to the question I want to ask next, which is about thinking about like collective participation and action. So you each named that there are multiple people and spaces in the communities you serve that you work with. Um, and I think the assets and the kind of changes that we want to see in terms of supporting positive development are activated through collective participation. So how does this idea that, everyone is or can be an asset builder show up in your work? And how do you think about kind of this collective participation? Sarah, since you were just talking about that, I'm gonna go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, thank you. So I look at from two different aspects. From a collective reach of it doesn't have to be just any one asset, right? Like when we look at, so we have the opportunity in our community to do an asset or a countywide asset survey every 5 years that identifies the assets of our youth in middle school and high school. And there's always this moment where we look at that data where we as youth serving organizations are like, what's the one thing I should do? Right? And the answer is always back to us, it's not any one thing, right? It is that collective building. It's those seeds that we're planting. It's how we're smiling and carrying on a conversation with a young person on the football field or in the grocery store or in the classroom or in an out of school time program. So it's not any one, if you just do this, everything is going to be fine. It is that incremental, how are we just building assets in any given moment so then it collectively adds up. And Zem said that, right? Like it's those little things over time. And so collectively, what I love about the assets is it's not like this one more thing I have to do. It's not one more thing I have to implement. It's a framework or handholds that we can be like, oh, we are already doing this, this, and this. Okay, what's working well with that? How can we build and broaden on that? Is there an area we could focus on? Because maybe we don't already. So that kind of helps with that programming standpoint to look at the assets as a whole, not to be overwhelmed by them, but instead to say, where are we grabbing bits and pieces of it? But then from a community-wide aspect, we have that collective impact model where as youth serving organizations, we can come together and say, what are we all doing? And if it's not me that can serve, like I'll look at substance use, right? Substance use is not something that we focus on. Do we focus on building values and positive identity? Sure. But if substance use is not something that we work on as an organization, and I have a young person that could use some support in that, I have all kinds of other supportive organizations in my community that have that developmental asset message embedded in their programming that then I can turn to and say, not me, but you. Like we know who then to connect across our community to move that needle forward in a collective impact model.
That's great. Zim, I see you nodding along. So I imagine some
I
of
know
this
my
resonates with your work as well.
my
So
head's gonna
yeah, go
pop.
ahead and share how you're thinking about this too.
I feel like I'm a bobblehead. I love everything that Sarah says, and I'm so grateful that I've been able to meet her through this experience, this process. Um, as she's talking, I'm thinking that cliche, it takes a village, keeps on coming up, right? I know people say it all the time, but it truly takes a village. And as I've mentioned before, with some of our programs where we train the trainer, that was the whole idea that it's not just focusing on youth. We have to figure out how we support the people who are supporting youth. But we go even further, again, and Sarah's doing the same. We work with the schools, we also work with the families. But in the schools, it's not enough for us to just say, hey, bring our program, great, here's some volunteers and train them and go in. We have found that the most successful experiences and partnerships for us is when the school accepts our invitation to come in and train the staff and the families. So we call it, I think Sarah was saying wrap around. We kind of refer to it as a trifecta, these circles that interconnect and overlap. So we in the classroom, we train the trainer, we empower volunteers, and then we do staff development, we train the teachers. And just like Sarah said, and I used to be a teacher and a principal, so I know the rolling of the eyes when I come in there and I say, it is not, but they start, calming down when you say, this is not a curriculum for you. It's not lesson plans. It's not one more thing to do. It's just a mindset. And you're already doing it. Like Sarah said, you're already an asset builder. Everybody who's, living and breathing is an asset builder. And you're already doing this amazing job, teachers. You just need to be more intentional and understand why you're doing it, right? So we train teachers and even different staff members, like yard duty. How do you use this language and have this philosophy and this framework work for you in the everyday interaction with kids? So what we love about it, when the schools let us train yard duty, staff, work with students, work with adults, and then offer parenting workshops around asset building, we see this common language, and that's the magic of it. We see the common language across, not just in individual classrooms in silo, but across the community. And in our Santa Clara County, many of the cities have adopted, and I have done a charter, adopted developmental assets as an asset building city. So that's when you get the chills. It's like, wow, like this is just living, we're living and breathing assets. And I think that's how it should be. It should be just that natural, because it's really common sense, but it's common sense backed with research. And you're already doing it. So why not just be more intentional about doing it?
Yeah. I mean, there's power there when you think about, when a whole community is sharing this mindset about young people's strengths and capacities and how to support them collectively. So it's really incredible to hear the work that you are each doing in your communities. We also know that in many communities, there are times when things like stress or fear can be, more intense, or conditions of economic hardship can be really difficult for parents and other caring adults, as well as young people, to manage, and it may make it harder to engage. So, when you're thinking about the complex social issues that many of us are experiencing, and you're bringing the assets into those spaces and to those individuals, how do you convey the value of this approach to members of your communities in times of stress or hardship? Zen, why don't we start with you?
I love this question. Yeah, in times of stress and economic hardship and other kinds of hardships, it can be really hard for both adults and youth to engage. And um, I have to pause because I think I'm going to get emotional about it. We live in a really hard time right now. And I have this guilt syndrome. I feel like we really messed it up for our kids. You know how you always say like, oh, the next generation, the future, the kids are our future. But we're messing up. We're not supporting our kids. So how can they be our future if we just, don't do more? And it's true. I don't think the assets framework can, necessarily fix systematic inequalities, right? We're not here to, fix. It's a preventative model, but here's the value of assets. It gives us something tangible, right? That we can do even when the resources feel scarce, right? So I don't have to have a lot of money to build assets. Okay, I think it takes some training and education and understanding, but I also don't have to do it alone, right? And I can build assets in simple things. So it's not something like I have to go out and get, right? I just need to understand it, get people around me to support me. And it makes me feel, I think when people get anxious or depressed or have anxiety about issues and things like that, it's because they don't feel like they are in control. But I feel like here's a framework, here's some research-based stuff, and here's some strategies. If I can just start doing that myself, and I think one of the things I really want to say is you have to start with yourself. When the airplane, whatever model, when the oxygen mask comes down, like you help yourself first. It's the same. Like you need to go through how do you feel about what's going on right now before you can show up for kids? What are you processing? Are you having anxiety? What's happening with you? Which assets do you need maybe? And where can you go to get those, to build that community and help yourself during this so that you can show up in a better way to support the kids. So while assets can't solve every issue, I do think they're so important now more than ever. They can be a part of the solution. So how we show up with empathy and listening well and modeling resiliency and approach conflict with peace. Huge, huge. Many of the adults in the world right now can focus on that and just live out what it means to be positive role models. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you to share how you're managing and approaching this in your work.
Well, and I think about it, I agree with everything Zem had to share, but I was also seeing like things pop up in the chat, and there was a comment about like developmental assets are not like the next new thing. It's not a buzzword. It's over time and research and different models of youth development. And if we like stop and look at that list of 40 assets, I think we would all say like those are things we want for ourselves and those are things we want for our youth. And so it's not like we're trying to like twist them into some specific way of thinking or believing. We're trying to build internal capacities for them to be able to manage conflict well, for them to be able to communicate effectively, to feel invested in their community, to know how to reach out for help, to have those resiliency skills. And there's a lot of good in the world. And to be able to grab onto there's good in the world and there's good in me. Wow. Like if a young person can feel it, there's good in them, like we're winning. Like we are absolutely winning. And so I do think, right, in my very idealistic, like positive perspective, I do think assets can change the world because all of those things that we need internally to make good decisions, to be able to collaborate well, to handle conflict, to, change the system, those are all things that young people need for their future also. We needed them for our future. We may or may not have had them, but as we develop them, to Zem's point, as adults, we can help youth develop them so that they can now also be invested in their communities, invested in their future, and say, we want things to grow and evolve and change to be more positive, and we have the ability to do that because we have these assets. We all lose our minds when we try to label things and we are trying to convince others that it's some sort of like way of like doing and being. Look at the list, man. It's just what we all want for ourselves and what we want for others to live in a positive world.
That really well stated. You're each sharing things that are very, I think, powerful, and I imagine resonating deeply with all who are listening. So at the beginning of the webinar, I had a chance to share the snapshot of the data. So like the state of the assets, part of it is about looking at large groups of young people and what they're experiencing. And there's a lot of value and importance to thinking about gathering those insights through surveys, but they don't always necessarily capture all of the other deeper impacts that come from the investments we make in cultivating assets. So I'd love for you to each share, if you think about like an impact story that you feel reflects the deeper value or impact of your work that might not be captured otherwise through something like a survey, or that sort of tool. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you to start.
Yeah, so we thrive on our impact stories, right? Like we are a nonprofit, so we have to tell a story, like we need funding. But we thrive on our impact stories because our staff, that is what lights them up. And so I look at this question two different ways. I love when I hear our staff come back from program and they're like, oh my gosh, this young person, they said this, or we did this activity and they learned this thing, or they helped their friend do this thing. Like, I'm like, ooh, that's assets in action, right? Like that's happening. And so to listen to our team members pop off about and share what they're seeing in the young people that they're working with, that just lights me right up. And then to help our staff see that, well, you're part of that picture, right? Like you're creating that environment, you're creating the space, you're doing that coaching and that guiding to help those young people demonstrate those assets. So that lights me up when I see the adults working with youth are like seeing the impact of their work. For me personally, Zem, I too got to pause for a moment. One of my favorite stories of being in the classroom with our curriculum was talking about leadership. And it was during the time period that I was doing a lot of work with adults in corporate and large nonprofit. And then on the other side, I was working with youth. And I had a small group of middle school students, and we were gathered up around a flip chart. And I had just asked the question, what makes a good leader? Right? Like, what makes a good leader? And they're listing, trust, communication, helpful. And they're just, we're listing it right up on this flip chart. And this young man over to my left, who rarely ever shared in our classroom discussion, quietly says, a good leader is someone who doesn't yell at you when you make a mistake. And I was in my mode of like writing things up, and I went to like, oh yeah. And I was like, whoa, like clearly he had had an experience that said, there's something wrong with me because I got yelled at in my state of failing forward and learning something new. And if I translate that even to adult lives, I'm pretty sure we could run a workshop of adults in different work environments and said, what is a good leader? And those same answers would come up. And there's adult that would say, it's someone who doesn't yell at you when you make a mistake. And so to have young people voice truth, man, it's super fun to be in classrooms with young people when they just like confidently speak, like, this is how we want things to be. This is what my hope is for my future. Those are those stories that really working with youth can be hard. And so when you have those stories, that's what gives you the energy to be like, I'm going back next week, right? Like we can keep coming back at it because we're seeing that impact. And so there's stories upon stories, but that's the one that really hit for me because of that synergy between what it means to be a leader for a young person and for an adult.
Thanks, Sarah, as well, for bringing that young person's voice to all of us too. I think that's really, really important and impactful. Zem, how about
Sarah, you
you?
just need to come out here and come out to California and meet my team. They would just love hanging out with you. And like Sarah said, yeah, we're also a nonprofit, so we have lots of stories, and we're always collecting stories and testimonials, we call them, but stories. There's so many. The one that comes to mind, and I think maybe it resonates the most, at least right now at this moment, is because even though it happened a while ago, it's just still there, and I can just see it vividly. So imagine yourself, I'm on a stage in an auditorium, and it was the first time I was up doing developmental assets in front of this big of a group at that time. It was 243 people, and it was classified staff. Classified means they were not certificated, they're not in the classroom teachers, but they were the aides, the lunch staff, the bus drivers, the maintenance crew, the school administrative person in the front office, and the health clerk, and so forth. And it was for a district-wide, back to school kickoff. And I knew I had a tough audience because there are people like, I got to get going, I got to go get set up and things like that. And what does this have to do with me? I drive the bus or I do the gardening. Like, what does that have to do with me? So that was really, I knew that was coming, but I knew I had common sense, backed up with research here, right? I knew I had a really good thing to say. And at the end, it was an hour and a half. And at the end, it was lunchtime. So most people were like, see ya, after they did the, the little survey at the end. One person waited and went all the way up to the front when I was packing up. And I can't remember if she was a lunch server or a classroom aide, but she was, kind of teary and teary-eyed. And she said to me, thank you. You changed my life. That was it. And I was like, oh, and I was like, I don't care what the 242 other people said are thinking. This one person, if I could just, that was amazing. And I'll never forget that. And what she went further and she said, I see the kids, I work with the kids. She said, I never had an idea. I never knew that I could make such an impact on kids just by little acts. And I was like, that's it. That was the one message. Took an hour and a half. I could have said it like she did, right? But it was amazing. So I thanked her, of course. I was very grateful for that. And that's why I get up in the morning as well. I'm sure for Sarah, for all these stories, it makes going to work and doing the work so meaningful and just so worth it. And if you can change the life for one person, I don't think I changed her life, but that's is a little humbling, but like, but just the fact that she felt that in an hour and a half, like just think if she started practicing some of that, and then the trickle effect for her to go tell other people that.
Absolutely. It's really, those are powerful stories that show, as you've each said, this is something that in some ways is really, it's not complicated. But it's so important, and it's important for adults, it's important for young people, and the impacts can be vast when we really invest in this kind of work. Um, in a moment, we are going to share and bring in some of the questions from the audience. Before we do that, because I don't want to run out of time for this, I'd love for you to each share some closing reflections or words of wisdom. And then you'll still be on with us because you can help answer some of the audience Q&A. But I want to make sure we leave a little bit of time for you to just close or reflect on our kind of panel discussion portion with something that you'd like to share. And this, you can choose who's ready to begin with your closing words. Whoever would like to can. Zem, I saw your hand. Go for it.
Sure. Some of this might have already been said, but I think just sum it up. I think everyone's an asset builder. Every moment counts. So if you take nothing else out of this, is you're already doing it, but every moment counts. What you say or don't say, what you do or don't do, it all matters. And it's, I already said it before, it's just really common sense. And you're building assets every day. You may not even realize it. So yay for you, you're already doing it. You just need to be more intentional about it, right? And invite other people. And the last piece is start with yourself. Look for young people's strengths, understand yourself, and then look for young people's strengths, listen with your heart. Don't be afraid to admit mistakes. And when we model growth and resilience, we're not only building assets in youth, but we build stronger families and communities. And that's the magic of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sarah.
There is absolutely nothing I could possibly add to what Zen said, because I would have said all of those same things. And I think of it as like a reciprocal experience. I think sometimes when right, so no one signed up for youth development work to make a lot of money. Okay, like no one does that. No one signed up to be like, this is going to be the easiest thing that I'm ever going to do. We sign up to make a positive influence in the life of a young person because we believe in their potential. And having that sense of heart and sharing that through everyone as an asset builder, doing, small things often, and letting that then feed you. I think that's the part, is like, it can feel so overwhelming where it's like, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to make a difference in this, in our schools, in our community? Like there's just so much, right? Just take a deep breath and just pause and be like, in this moment right now, I'm making a difference for this young person. And Zem, I would say that you probably changed that person's life, because in that moment it was a shift, and it's those incremental shifts over time that's going to change that trajectory. And just revel in that. Be like, yes, I'm doing good right now, and let that then kind of refeed you to then come back and keep doing the work. Thrive on those moments where you're sharing your purpose and what you want to do good in the world with those young people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. I want to invite Ben to come back on screen and join us. And our audience has been very engaged. I see the chat popping up. I haven't been able to follow along in detail, but I'm excited to know people are engaging with one another. And lots of people have submitted questions. So Ben, you've had a moment to kind of glance, I think, at some of the questions. Is there one that you'd like to start with?
Yeah, these are wonderful questions. One of them I think is really is kind of contextualizing even today some of the technological advances that have happened, things that we know about AI, and things that are the ways that AI is being more integrated into young people's lives. And how does AI play into kind of this conversation around developmental assets and relationships? Especially in relation to young people turning to more companion bot types for relationships. I would love to hear either one of you talk about that from a practical standpoint of what you're seeing on the ground, and ways that you kind of would think about it through this developmental assets or developmental relationships lens.
Yeah, I can jump in. I just think about the importance of building positive peers, and how then it is important that we help young people understand what it means to be in a positive relationship. So some of that I think is about helping them identify, well, what's important to me in a relationship? What are the values that I have? How do I find friends that have those same values? but also equip them with the skills that say, you know what, if I have a conflict with this friend, how am I gonna resolve this and have a conversation? Or if I'm finding that this is not a good friendship or a good peer for me to be aligning with because maybe some behaviors that they have, how do I choose to have those boundaries and maybe extract myself from that relationship? I think sometimes we're all like, it's either all in or it's all out. And that's not how relationships work.
Yeah, that's really great. I love that. Sim, did you?
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. And I'm just thinking about one of the things we do is we have a high school, although we work primarily elementary through or preschool through 8th grade, we do have a relatively new 5th year now student leadership council where we get to work with high school kids. So Sarah, I get very jealous that you get to work with the older ones that much. But it just resonates with me about just having youth voice and creating that space, having that space. And then back to that other caring adult, I don't mean to preach, but it's like they need a space where they can be themselves and they don't have to be scared about what they're going to say, and it doesn't have to be right. And a lot of times for us, that means without the parents, right? And putting our ego aside. So these other caring adults. So, through mentoring, through coaching, leadership skills, but even though it's a leadership group, we try to build space on, let's just have some talking time. What do you want to talk about? What's relevant to you right now? And they actually do really open up because they're like, yeah, you're not my parent. I can pretty much kind of say other things, right? And I think that's really, really, really important.
Yeah. Joanna, is there anything you want to add to that too? I know from a developmental perspective as well.
Yeah, I think, we all, technology is another context for development, is how I think about it. And AI is a, newer developing technology, just like many other technologies have changed over time. So I think understanding how those relationships online are meeting young people's needs, and understanding how to support and help them in navigating those things. As I think where Sarah started, there's like the in real life side of
Yeah.
developing those skills that then they can bring. I've, followed some of this in terms of research and media, and some of the idea that maybe if you have an online companion who's not pushing back so much or giving you any sort of conflicts or challenging you, I think then understanding how that feels if you're a young person in that relationship, and also maybe a little bit about, what's missing or what might be different when you're thinking about peer live relationships with peers or others. But we know importantly that for many youth who don't have access to the relationships that they need in the moment, they have to find them somewhere. And so before AI, online community groups were really could be a source of really positive development for young people. But ensuring that they have a stronger web of relationships around them, I think will then provide what we need to make sure that they are feeling sort of supported and developing in ways that are important and healthy.
Ben, if I may add one more thing, I just remembered is what was surprising to me working with the high school students is that we assume that they all love the technology, they all want everything, and we're the ones, the adults, going no, 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 but when we went deeper, they actually said they are concerned, they're concerned for their younger siblings. And it's interesting, it was eye-opening, like, what? Oh, you actually do feel like you have too much screen time and do this and all this and the AI and all that, and they're genuinely concerned, and they're thinking about what they see the effects for the younger siblings. So I think for us to be more open-minded and like, yeah, it's not about they all want, it's black, not black and white, right? It's bad, it's good. We really talk about, like, what's good about it and what's bad about it, and how do you deal with those issues.
Amazing. There's so many great questions. We're not going to have time to get to them, Joanna. I could listen to you all talk all day as well. Do you want to do some take-home messages, and then we'll let hopefully send people off inspired and excited to go be asset builders in their own environments.
Absolutely. So let me start by again thanking Sarah and Zim tremendously for your contributions and wisdom. I'm going to share my screen again and pop up the some key takeaways. All right, can everybody see that? Awesome. Okay, so we know that each and every young person has strengths and they have the capacity to contribute and to thrive. Our developmental assets profile offers a snapshot of how much and how often each young person can access the experiences and strengths and supports that cultivate thriving pathways. At a big picture level, this year's snapshot is promising. More young people are experiencing assets more frequently this year compared to the last 4 years. And we also know that this work can't be done alone. You heard brilliant examples of that from what Sarah and Zim are doing every day. Relationships can be the driver. Developmental relationships are a critical starting point for building and cultivating developmental assets, helping young people build connections with each other, their schools, their communities, their families. We know that we need to attune assets. Young people are growing and developing in ways that are really wonderful, and we have to be there to, working and growing alongside of them to make sure the assets are attuned to their needs and their skills. And everyone can be an asset builder. We can't say that enough. You can map your community to gain an understanding of the people and places that you can work with so that you're doing this work at a really holistic level. We can also think about what it means to take action. It's really up to adults, educators, family members, neighbors, practitioners to draw out the assets that already exists within and around young people. We can do this through building strong relationships. We have a relationship check on our resources hub, which is a tool for self-reflection and conversation that helps us assess where relationships with young people are strong and where they can grow. We know that young people bring critical strengths to their own development and contribute to their families and communities. So a strengths-based approach is central to this work. The first step in engaging with young people is understanding their day-to-day experiences. We can do that through gathering insights through surveys, and the data we can work with to inform, the actions that we take. And last, developmental assets can provide a shared language and purpose for organizations working to create fertile ground for positive youth development. We encourage all of you to share the developmental assets messages that you heard today. And I want to thank you so much for taking time to join us. So we hope you all enjoy the rest of your days and afternoons. Take good care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.